When I was a young man, through no particular merit of my own, I think, I stumbled into a very senior leadership role in a huge organization. I was in the academic world and I loved it, and I probably would have just remained a graduate student and earned all the degrees they'd let me earn. Played basketball every day, lived in married student housing. It was the perfect life. But I had to get a job because my wife wanted to go to graduate school. So I took what I thought was a temporary job, and it turned into a longer range job, and then I got recruited into another. And I found myself at the tender age of 25 or just turned 26 as the senior vice president, the number 2 guy in an enormous organization, a system of colleges, universities of 850,000 students, stretched over a whole state, 58 colleges in various places, 16 universities, billions and billions of dollars in budgets, and multi-layered, politically charged, insane bureaucracy. Sound familiar to anybody? That's where I live. I mean, this looked familiar a little bit. That's where I found myself. And it was God's providence, I knew later. At the time I thought, well, it's probably only temporary. Maybe the band will make it. I don't know. But I took the job. And I was totally in over my head. I had no background for this work. I was trained as a scientist, a cognitive scientist, and I thought I was going to get back to that research someday. Never did. But here I was in this crazy. Everybody who worked for me was twice my age or more, and it was insane. But a couple of good things happened early. One is I realized how wonderful they were. These were bureaucrats, the next levels down, who had just been beat up their whole lives. And I thought, and they were really quite bright. And so I gave them room to breathe and loved on them a little bit and said, if I'm nice to you, will you teach me what I need to know? And people love to teach people things, especially their bosses. We all want to take them to the woodshed or do something and teach them something. So they were very willing to talk to me and share what they knew. But I also knew that I couldn't lead on the basis of technical expertise because I didn't have it. So what were my alternatives? So I thought, well, I, at this level, will lead from principle. While I learn the technical side, I can be solid by saying, I'm going to be the guy in the room who makes sure that whatever the decision is, it's a principled decision. And we're going to be conscious and public and transparent about those principles. Let's name them on the front end. And when we get stuck, we're going to go back to the principle and say, what's the principle we wanted this decision to reflect and why? And that was super helpful because people were very hungry for principle-centered leadership. They'd had every kind of leadership imaginable thrown at them, but rarely had they experienced that. And so that served me pretty well. And I progressed. And in fact, I progressed really rapidly and became kind of the golden boy in the organization at a young age. And I listened to the praise, and my head got swollen. And I was full of myself. And then one day something really important happened for me. It happened in a staff meeting. In the time-honored tradition of staff meetings, there we were, all the senior staff. I hurt someone. I hurt someone I really cared about. Her name was Kathy. She was brilliant and a member of the team, but I hurt her. How did I hurt her? I can't quite remember, but my success in that multi-layered bureaucracy had taught me how to do things, the things we don't put in the curriculum, the things that you think you have to do to survive in those kinds of environments, like when to share information and when to withhold it, right? Who to cozy up to and who not to, when to speak your mind and when to hold your tongue because it could be dangerous. There's a whole toolbox of essential political skills that people learn from the environment and from their mentors and from watching others. And that's a part of the large-scale organizational survival kit, maybe. And I had learned it. So I'm guessing I hurt her by using those tools that were becoming second nature. Anyway, she did me this magnificent favor. Instead of swallowing whatever I'd said and done and going home and kicking the dog, she followed me back to my office and she closed the door and she let me have it. And all I could say is, oh, you're right. You're right. She said essentially, you're not who you think you are. You're certainly not who you say you are. Let me show you who you are. And she held up a mirror to me. That was hard. So I went home that weekend, and I was a fairly young Christian at the time, and I just wanted to be of service to the world. I didn't seek this job out of ego and so on. I wasn't ambitious, and yet I was turning into somebody I didn't want to become. And it was happening to me at work through my success. I had to figure that out. And so the rest of my career really was a project to figure out how do we go into those environments, because they're unavoidable. How do we go into those environments and survive them, maybe even thrive in them in ways that don't deform our characters? And later it turned into a book. But the core idea is pretty simple. It's that what we do every day, our work, the things we do and the tools we use to do it and the habits we cultivate and the habits of thought that we develop, are all those things are shaping us more powerfully than we're shaping them. We have this arrogance that says we make our own tools. This tool serves me. Guess what? The game's playing you. And I had this epiphany that the jerks, the old burnt out husks of human beings that I met in my work in these bureaucracies, didn't start out that way. They started out just like me. And over time, they were deformed by what they did. The rat race. Even the ones that won. Maybe especially the ones that won. So that was really my work for the next 30, 40 years. Looking for a way to thrive at work. Now, I told you I was young. And so my journey involved a lot of youthful mistakes. And as a person who thinks like a poet, I think in analogy most of the time. And so for me, trained first as a chemist and then later as a cognitive scientist, all these crazy chemicals in your brain, as I was working on all this, the image that came to me was that of a crucible. Not the one where you play snooker, but the one that chemists use to perform reactions that are too violent to do in a normal flask. It's a hardened ceramic vessel, and you do things in it that are highly reactive, that have heat and pressure and corrosive byproducts. And I thought, heat, pressure, corrosive byproduct, reactivity, staff meeting. I could relate to it, and I thought that work for some of us some of the time, for some all the time. For very few, this isn't true. Work is a crucible. It's a place you go that's acting on you as you think you're acting in it, and there's something happening there. And it's unavoidable. You can't check out. One of my children thinks she can. I've wished her luck with that. She'll be back. The crucible follows you because it's a human concoction. So I'm playing with this, writing in my journals, trying to figure out how to be responsible at work. And the metaphor shifted. This is what metaphors are supposed to do. They're supposed to teach you the two things you didn't know were similar really are. And it shifted to a different meaning. As crucible has an older meaning than the modern chemistry meaning. It's one of the oldest technologies. Do y'all know what it is? What's the oldest human technology? The beginning of what we call civilization. Metallurgy. Metallurgy. So, very primitive people discovered that if you take native copper, it's sort of in a matrix of rock, and you heat it up, we know that you heat it to 900 degrees Celsius. It will melt and come out of the rock. The rock remains solid. And it'll come out, and it's native copper in liquid, and so you can cast it into useful objects. And if there happens to be a little bit of tin in the rock, which there often is, it alloys the copper and makes it much harder so you can do something with it. You can put an edge on it. You can make tools that are useful, like a sickle or a plowshare. And we call that the Bronze Age. And you do all of that in a crucible. I thought, now there's an idea. What if the crucible's unavoidable, what would it take to make it a place of formation instead of deformation? That would be interesting. I played with that for a while. And then the dang thing shifted again because somebody gave me a lovely little book to read by Paulo Coelho called The Alchemist. Anybody read that book? Yeah. Lovely little book, isn't it? Magical realism. It's his best book. Don't read his last one, it's awful. But this was a great book. So it's about alchemy. And alchemy is this sort of mixture of philosophy and magic and science in the Middle Ages. And the core objective in alchemy is to find the rarest of all substances. It's called the philosopher's stone. It represents wisdom in physical form. And you heat a base or ignoble metal, get the language, lead, in the crucible with the philosopher's stone, and it is transmuted or transformed into a noble metal, like gold or silver. Now, there's a powerful metaphor. What if going to work every day wasn't just formative, it was transformative? What if we were meant to be transformed by our work? That would be an interesting experience. While all this was happening, I had one other related epiphany, and that was being young. This was all about me, because that's what youth is about, me. And I was thinking, how can I go to work? How can I do this? And it finally occurred to me, maybe somebody dope slapped me, I don't know, but it finally occurred to me, oh yes, as a leader, I make other people's crucibles. It's kind of a scary idea. We have safe words for it, things like organizational culture and so on. But it's just been profoundly interesting to me that institutions and organizations that we created to serve over time harm sometimes the very people they were designed to serve. I'll tell you how serious I was about that. I chaired a huge healthcare system as a part of my career for many years, and we just couldn't make progress on the number of people who were harmed by what we were supposed to be doing to help them. So we put in a new procedure. It was painful, but we put in the back of our board book every month a picture and a story about every person we had killed in our hospitals in the last month. That's how serious we were about trying to figure out, keep in front of us that our presumption of virtue because of our mission wasn't enough, that we had to actively work every day to find some way to turn that crucible into a place of transformation instead of deformation for the people we served and for the people who worked in it. Wouldn't that be interesting? So a lot of that was about figuring out if there were ways, things we could do, and ways we could think in these real organizations that had bottom lines and so on, so that people would come home from work nourished instead of depleted, and enlarged instead of diminished. And instead of being in a rat race, they'd feel like they were on some kind of journey that lined up with their telos, their purpose. And